billionaires are fighting over a broken casino empire. One of them isn't even allowed to be in the room, the other may not actually want to win, and the empire they're bidding on has already destroyed every owner it's ever had. Somehow, both of them already know how this story ends. And they're still fighting to be next. On the weekend of March 14th, 2026, a team of lawyers and financial advisors gathered inside the Post Oak Hotel in Houston to negotiate the sale of Caesars Entertainment. More than 50 resorts, 9 properties on the Las Vegas Strip, an enterprise value of $31.5 billion. The bid, $32 a share. The buyer, Fertitta Entertainment. The man whose name was on the hotel, whose company was making the offer, was 6,000 miles away. Tilman Fertitta, a Galveston-born billionaire worth more than $11 billion, the owner of the Golden Nugget casinos, the Landry's restaurant empire, the Houston Rockets, had resigned as CEO of his own company months earlier to become the United States ambassador to Italy. Ethics rules required that he maintain only passive investment interests. Whether he was directing this acquisition from abroad or whether his team was operating independently was a question no reporting had conclusively answered. The legal framework said he couldn't be involved. The enforcement mechanism, the Office of Government Ethics, had been weakened after Trump fired its director. And waiting just off stage with a backup bid of $33 a share was Carl Icahn, 89 years old, the most famous corporate raider in American history. A man who had already bought into this exact company, placed directors on its board, forced its sale, and walked away richer. He'd done it 7 years ago. Now he was back, and sources on both sides told CNBC they weren't sure whether Icahn actually wanted to buy Caesars this time, or whether he was simply driving up the price to inflate the value of his own stake. This isn't a bidding war. It's a question of who's willing to take the damage. Because to understand why either name would be attached to a Caesars bid in 2026, you need to understand what this company does to the people who own it. Tilman Fertitta built his empire from a single seafood restaurant in Katy, Texas. He took control of Landry's restaurants in 1986 and spent 3 decades turning it into one of the largest privately held hospitality companies in America. More than 600 venues: Morton's, the Steakhouse, Saltgrass, Rainforest Cafe, the Golden Nugget casinos. In 2017, he bought the Houston Rockets for $2.2 billion. By 2024, he was the largest individual shareholder in Wynn Resorts, holding more than 12% of outstanding shares. He owned 6 acres of undeveloped strip land, purchased for $270 million with plans for a 43-story hotel casino that hadn't broken ground. His cousins Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta III ran Red Rock resorts and station casinos, dominating the locals market. The family already touched nearly every segment of Las Vegas gambling. Fertitta Entertainment had tried to buy Caesars before. In 2018, the company proposed merging the Golden Nugget chain with Caesars. Caesars rejected the offer. The door closed. Carl Icahn's path was different. He didn't build hospitality empires. He bought broken ones, stripped them to the frame, and sold them. In 1998, he acquired the Stratosphere, a struggling Las Vegas tower, restructured it, and sold it for more than $1 billion. He did the same with the Tropicana, bought in during bankruptcy in 2008, installed new leadership, sold it in 2018 for $1.85 billion. The pattern never changed. Find a casino that's bleeding, take control, force a sale or cut until the math works, exit. And here's where the two stories collide. Just months after Fertitta Entertainment's 2018 bid was rejected, Icahn disclosed a 9.78% stake in Caesars. Within weeks, he'd placed 3 associates on the board: Keith Koza, Courtney Mather, James Nelson. He pushed out CEO Mark Frisora. He made his position public. The company should be sold. By July 2020, it was. Eldorado Resorts, a much smaller operator out of Reno, acquired Caesars for $17.3 billion. Icahn said he was pleased. So Fertitta Entertainment wanted Caesars and got rejected. Icahn showed up 1 year later and forced the sale to someone else entirely. That's the backstory behind the collision happening now. But it still doesn't explain why either side would come back. Not until you see the wreckage. In December 2006, Apollo Global Management and TPG Capital agreed to buy Caesars, then called Harrah's, in a leveraged buyout worth $31 billion, $6 billion in cash, $22 billion in debt. The deal took over a year to close. By the time it finalized in January 2008, the financial crisis was already gathering speed. Consumer spending collapsed. Casino revenue cratered. The company's leverage ratio nearly doubled within months. That was the original sin. Everything that followed traces back to that one deal. But it got worse. Between 2013 and 2014, Apollo and TPG executed a series of internal transactions, transferring assets between subsidiaries, eliminating a parent guarantee that protected creditors. The maneuvers triggered accusations from Elliott Management, Oaktree Capital, and Appaloosa Management. They called it a modern-day casino heist. The heist didn't happen on the casino floor. It happened in the boardroom. Estimated liability, $5 billion. Harvard Business School built a case study around it. A book followed, The Caesars Palace Coup, describing the whole saga as a brawl between private equity engineers and distressed debt predators. In January 2015, Caesars filed for Chapter 11 with $18 billion in debt. The bankruptcy lasted 2 years. Apollo and TPG's stake was slashed from 60% to roughly 16%. And when the company emerged in October 2017, something fundamental had changed. And this is the part most people miss. Caesars didn't just go bankrupt. It came out of bankruptcy without its own buildings. Its real estate, the physical buildings, the land, Caesars Palace itself, had been spun off into a new entity, VC Properties, a real estate investment trust. Caesars Entertainment no longer owned its own casinos. It rented them. $14 billion in lease commitments to a REIT carved out of its own body during bankruptcy. The name was still on the building. The building belonged to someone else. Now think about what that means for whoever buys this company next. Fertitta Entertainment's bid values Caesars' equity at $6.5 billion. But the real price, once you include the debt, is $31.5 billion. Long-term liabilities exceed $24 billion. The company generates about $3 billion in operating cash flow, but after $2.3 billion in interest expenses, barely $1 billion survives. The stock peaked at $119 in October 2021. By February 2026, it hit $18.14, an 85% collapse, 4 consecutive quarters of net losses. The Las Vegas segment down 10%. Whoever acquires Caesars doesn't inherit a casino empire. They inherit the accumulated financial wreckage of every previous owner. The Apollo debt, the VC leases, the El Dorado merger costs, still sitting on the books, still compounding. The prize is poisoned, and both men came back for it anyway. Icahn moved first. He disclosed a new stake in May 2024, sending the stock surging 11% in a single day. He told Bloomberg he wasn't considering activism. By March 2025, he'd placed 2 more associates on the board, Jesse Lynn, his general counsel, and Ted Papapostolo, his CFO. Then, in January 2026, with the stock in free fall, he made a quiet bid, $28.50 a share. Management could stay. Same playbook as 2019. Build a stake, place directors, wait for weakness, make an offer when the price is low enough to guarantee a return. But here's the question that no one could answer then, and no one can answer now. Does Icahn actually want to own Caesars? Or does he want someone else to buy it at a higher price, inflating his shares on the way up? Both versions of Icahn have precedent. Both have made him money before. He told people in 2024 he'd never pursue activism at Caesars. Less than a year later, his general counsel and CFO were on the board. He said in January 2026 that he genuinely wanted to buy. Within 2 months, Sources on the other side were openly calling his bid a price-inflating tactic. Fertitta Entertainment entered weeks later. On March 11th, the Wall Street Journal reported the company was offering $34 a share, roughly $7 billion in equity, topping Icahn's $33. Within days, Fertitta Entertainment secured a 45-day exclusive window, pushing Icahn to the sidelines. The negotiations that weekend at the Post Oak carried layers of ambiguity that no one could cleanly resolve. Fertitta Entertainment, wholly owned by Tilman Fertitta, was making the bid. But Fertitta had pledged to the U.S. government that he would remain passive. Whether a passive owner's company can independently pursue a $31 billion acquisition, whether the team was acting on standing instructions, long-term strategy, or something more direct, is a question no public reporting has answered. The legal line existed. Whether it held was unknowable from the outside, and the complications didn't stop there. If the deal closed, Fertitta Entertainment would control 50-plus Caesars properties while its owner held the largest stake in Wynn Resorts, a significant position in DraftKings, and ownership of an NBA franchise. Caesars Sportsbook would likely have to stop taking bets on the Houston Rockets. SEC filings showed Fertitta listing more than 4 million call options on his Wynn shares. How gaming regulators would treat this unprecedented web of cross-holdings had never been tested. Both bids were reportedly structured to spin off Caesars Digital, the online sportsbook and iGaming division, into a separate entity, and to divide the company without requiring VC Properties' consent. When the news broke, VC shares dropped 3%. The REIT born from Caesars' bankruptcy was watching its largest tenant get carved up again by bidders who had designed their offers specifically to avoid asking permission. Step back and look at the full pattern. Caesars Entertainment has been bought, bankrupted, restructured, sold, rebranded, merged, and put back on the market 4 times in under 20 years. Apollo loaded it with debt. The creditors split it in half. Icahn forced a sale. Eldorado bought it and watched the stock lose 85% of its value. And now 2 competing bids, one from the company Fertitta built, one from the raider who sold Caesars last time, are circling a version that is more leveraged and more structurally fragile than anything either side tried to acquire the first time around. This isn't just a Caesars story. It's what happens when financial engineering outlives the business itself, when the brand becomes worth more than the company behind it, when the name on the building keeps glowing long after the entity underneath has been hollowed out, flipped, and loaded with someone else's debt. The 45-day exclusive window is expected to close in early April 2026. Prediction market traders Kalshi assign an 80% probability that Caesars will be acquired before the end of the year, but regulatory approvals would push any closing into 2027, and the deal could still collapse. Nothing is signed. Every single person who has bought Caesars thought they were the one who finally understood it. Apollo believed that in 2008. The hedge fund creditors believed it during the bankruptcy. Eldorado believed it in 2020. Each one loaded the company with new debt. Each one inherited the damage from the last collapse. Each one watched the math turn against them. The brand held its value. The entity behind it kept dying. Now Fertitta Entertainment and Icahn sit on opposite sides of a deal that hasn't closed. One bid comes from a company whose owner is a diplomat barred from operational involvement. How much distance that creates in practice, no one outside the inner circle can say. The other comes from a 90-year-old raider who has bought and sold casinos his entire career and may not actually want this one. Between them sits $24 billion in liabilities, a name that still means something to everyone who's ever visited Las Vegas, and a history that suggests whoever signs will spend the next decade learning exactly what they bought. None of them understood it, and now it's someone else's turn to find out why.